My son told me I was too old for love, that it was time to settle down, accept my age, and stop seeking something as foolish as companionship. He said I should be content with the quiet life I had left. His words cut deep, but it wasn't just his opinion that stung. It was the fact that he, someone I'd raised and loved, couldn't see past the years on my face. At 80, I thought I had all the time in the world to reflect on the past. But there was something inside me that longed for more. Something that told me love was still out there, still worth fighting for, no matter how many birthdays I had behind me. I thought back to the days when my wife and I would share laughter, dreams, and even silence together. That connection, that shared journey, was irreplaceable. Yet now that she was gone, I found myself facing each day in a world that had become too quiet, too still. It was lonely. And the truth was, I missed the joy of sharing life with someone special. So, I didn't listen to Ryan. I didn't let age dictate my desires. Instead, I took a step that I knew would shock him. A decision that would leave him rethinking everything he thought he knew about love, about life, and about me. What I did next? Well, it wasn't just about finding love. It was about proving that age is no barrier when the heart still beats with hope and courage. And when he saw it for himself, the look on his face left him speechless. At 80 years old, I thought I had lived a full life. I had spent decades working hard, raising a family, and building a life that, at the time, seemed perfect. My wife, Sarah, was the love of my life. We had raised our children together, worked through the ups and downs, and spent countless evenings sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, sharing stories about our day. We weren't rich or famous, but we had something far more valuable, a deep, genuine connection. I had always believed that this kind of bond was the pinnacle of life, that it was something you could hold on to forever. But time, as it does, took Sarah away from me. Cancer, an illness that came on so quickly, left me alone. I remember the night she passed. I stood by her side, holding her hand as she slipped away, and in that moment I lost not only the love of my life but a piece of myself. The house that once echoed with laughter, conversations, and warmth now stood silent. I could still hear her voice in my memories, like a song that had been played too many times but would never be forgotten. But those days were over, and suddenly, the silence felt unbearable. It's strange how much noise a person makes without even trying: the clink of dishes, the rustle of paper, the footsteps through the hallway. With Sarah gone, all that noise turned into a hollow silence that settled into every corner of our home. The children, of course, had grown up and moved out long ago, leaving me with the quiet company of my own thoughts. I had my garden, a hobby I had picked up after retiring, and I kept myself busy. But no matter how many flowers I planted or how many books I read, the emptiness persisted. It was a quiet loneliness that gnawed at me from the inside, one that had no easy cure. Sure, I had friends, and I stayed active, but there was something missing. The years had stolen the spark, and I could feel it. I had been alone long enough that I started to wonder if I would ever feel alive again. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I knew one thing deep down. There was still a part of me that missed love. Not just companionship or friendship, but the kind of love I had, shared with Sarah. I remember one evening sitting alone at the kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of me. The sun had long since set, and I had no plans for the night. It was then that I realized something. For the first time in a long while, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw the face of someone who was still here. I had spent so much time mourning what I had lost that I had forgotten to see what I still had. The opportunity to live, to experience, and yes, to love again. The thought startled me, even more so because I had never imagined that at this age I would still feel that way. There were times when I felt like I was too old for anything new, too old for excitement, too old for change, too old for love. It was easier to slip into the role of the wise, retired man who could sit back, relax, and let the world pass him by. But a small voice inside me refused to accept that. I still had so much left to give. I wasn't ready to fade away into the background of life just yet. The world around me had changed. When I was younger, people didn't think twice about getting married at 20, starting families in their early 20s and watching their children grow. But now it felt as though the idea of love and companionship in later years was a foreign concept to most people. Society had a way of pushing older folks aside, making us feel like we were out of touch or irrelevant. I saw it in the way people looked at me sometimes, like I didn't quite fit in anymore, like I had no place in the fast-paced modern world. But the truth was, I wasn't ready to just give up on living. I had my pride, of course. I had spent my entire life working hard, providing for my family, and making sure we had everything we needed. I wasn't about to start relying on anyone for my happiness now. But I also wasn't about to accept a life of quiet resignation either. There was something within me, something that refused to give in to the notion that age could limit me. If I could still wake up every morning, put on my shoes, and tend to my garden, then surely I could still experience the warmth of someone else's presence. Someone who would understand me, laugh with me, and share in the joy of living the way Sarah once did. At the time, I had no idea how to go about finding that kind of love again. I wasn't exactly out there looking for it. My life was simple, quiet and predictable, and I was content with that. But the idea of meeting someone who could light up my life, someone who could share in the stories I still had to tell, someone who would appreciate the little things like I did, that idea began to take root in my mind. I didn't want to just exist anymore. I wanted to live fully, to embrace whatever joys life had left to offer. I had no illusions about the challenges of dating at my age. My body had changed. I wasn't the young man I used to be, chasing dreams and chasing after life's fleeting pleasures. But what I lacked in physical strength, I made up for in experience, in wisdom, in knowing what truly mattered. What I had learned from a lifetime of loving, losing, and living was that time could never take away the heart's ability to feel, to connect, and to give. The idea of love, in its purest form, was something that had never truly left me. It was a feeling that had been buried under years of routine, of grieving, of learning how to navigate life without the one person who had once been my world. But now, as the days passed and I became more comfortable with my own sense of self, I realized that love was still possible for me, still there, waiting patiently for me to reach out and claim it. And so there I was at 80, with a renewed sense of hope. The house, though quieter than it once was, no longer felt quite as empty. My heart, once shadowed by grief, began to feel lighter again. I may have been older, but I was far from done. I hadn't given up on life, and I certainly hadn't given up on love. The conflict began the moment my son Ryan spoke those words. I had been careful to keep my personal life, my desire for companionship, to myself. I didn't want to cause a stir or make anyone uncomfortable. I had seen how society viewed older people seeking love, often with a dismissive eye, so I kept my feelings hidden. But I also knew deep down that I wasn't ready to just sit idly by and let life pass me. I still wanted to feel alive, to have someone to share my days with, someone who would walk beside me as I continued down this path of life. It wasn't just about loneliness. It was about regaining something I had lost. The joy of being seen, the warmth of a partner's presence, and the excitement of a shared journey. I had met someone, a wonderful woman named Helen. We connected in a way I hadn't felt in years. Her smile reminded me of Sarah, but she also brought her own unique energy into my life. We talked for hours, laughed together, and found a bond that felt both familiar and new. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It wasn't meant to be something that would sweep us off our feet. But it was real. She made me feel like I wasn't invisible, like I still had something to offer. After months of getting to know her, I decided it was time to tell Ryan. I was nervous, but I thought he'd understand. Surely, after all these years, he would see that I wasn't just chasing some fleeting distraction. I wasn't trying to replace his mother. I was simply seeking a connection. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Ryan's reaction was like a slap in the face. He was furious. I had always tried to give him everything, my time, my advice, my love. I had spent my life working to ensure that he and his sister had everything they needed, sacrificing my own desires for their well-being. And yet, in that moment, I felt like I had failed him. He didn't see me as a man who deserved happiness. He saw me as an elderly person who should be content with solitude and not seek something more. "Dad, you're too old for this," he told me, his voice thick with disbelief. "You should be resting now, not chasing after relationships. What's next? Are you going to start acting like you're 20 again?" His words hit me harder than I anticipated. It was as if all my years of hard work and sacrifice had been erased in an instant. I wasn't just his father anymore. I was an old man who no longer had a place in the world of love and connection. At first I tried to explain. I told him that I wasn't trying to replace his mother or forget her. I was simply trying to move forward, to live my life with purpose. But Ryan wasn't hearing. The more I spoke, the angrier he became, and the more I realized that what I wanted, what I needed, was something he couldn't fathom. I had always thought of him as a smart, open-minded person, but in that moment he seemed so closed off, so set in his belief that once you reached a certain age, your opportunities for joy and love were over. It felt like he was telling me that I was no longer relevant, that my needs and desires didn't matter anymore. But the worst part was the guilt. Ryan's words made me question myself. Was I really too old to be in a relationship? Should I have accepted the quiet solitude of my life and left it at that? The idea that I might be too old to love, to seek companionship, lingered in my mind for days. I had always been a man who took pride in providing for my family, in being a strong father figure. Now, it felt like I was failing to live, up to Ryan's expectations, failing to meet the standards of a society that told me my time had passed. On the other hand, there was a part of me that refused to let go of this new chapter I was trying to write for myself. I had spent so many years wrapped up in responsibility, in being the pillar of the family, that I had neglected my own needs for too long. I had watched my wife suffer in silence as her health slowly deteriorated, never once thinking about what would happen to me after she was gone. It wasn't until I found Helen that I truly realized how much of myself I had buried for the sake of others. I wanted to rediscover that part of me, the part that still had hope, still had dreams, still had the capacity for joy. But now my son's anger and judgment threatened to crush that hope. Ryan wasn't the only one struggling with this idea. My friends, who had once been supportive of the idea of me finding companionship again, seemed to pull back when they saw how upset Ryan was. They didn't want to be caught in the middle of a family dispute, so they kept their distance. It was as though my desire to find happiness had become a point of contention that threatened the peace I had spent my whole life building. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about what I should and shouldn't do, but no one seemed to care about what I actually needed. The real conflict, though, wasn't just between Ryan and me. It was within myself. The internal struggle I felt was intense. On one hand, I didn't want to disappoint Ryan or make him feel like he was losing his father to someone else. But on the other hand, I didn't want to bury my desires, my hopes and my dreams for the sake of someone else's comfort. Was it selfish to want to live fully at this stage in my life? Was it wrong to seek love when I had already experienced such a profound loss? The weight of this conflict of trying to navigate between my own needs and my son's expectations was something I hadn't anticipated. Despite everything, I couldn't give up on the idea of love. I couldn't accept that my age should limit my happiness, my freedom, and my ability to experience joy. So, instead of backing down, I decided to take a bold step, one that would force Ryan to see that love has no age, no expiration date. I invited him to a family gathering, not just as a way of introducing Helen, but as a statement. I was still here, still capable of experiencing life, still deserving of love. I knew this might be the hardest thing I'd ever do, but I had to try. If I could find happiness at 80, surely Ryan could learn to respect that, and perhaps even see it for what it truly was. A victory, not just for me, but for the idea that love and joy can exist at any age. I wasn't sure how he would respond, but I was determined to show him that Despite everything, I still had so much more to offer than what he could see. The tension in our home grew thick with each passing day after Ryan's outburst. I had hoped the initial shock of the situation would pass quickly, that Ryan would calm down and reconsider his words. But he didn't. Every time I tried to bring up the subject of Helen, I could see the anger in his eyes, his mouth tightening as though he were trying to hold back something worse than just disapproval. I had always prided myself on the fact that Ryan and I were close, that we had a relationship built on respect, understanding, and years of shared experiences. I had always been there for him, through his childhood struggles, his teenage rebellion, and even the difficult moments in his adult life. I had sacrificed so much to give him a better future, and now, after all those years, I felt like I was losing him. I couldn't understand how a simple desire for companionship could be met with such disdain. It hurt in a way I didn't expect. I had been through a lot in my life, loss, hardship, and sacrifice, but nothing stung as much as the idea that my own son thought I didn't deserve to be happy. His words still echoed in my ears. You should just be resting now, not chasing after relationships. I didn't want to make it a big deal, but the weight of those words began to settle like a stone in my chest, suffocating me. It wasn't just that he disagreed with me. It was the implication behind it, that at my age, I should be content with solitude, that my life was somehow over, and that seeking new connections was foolish. It was as if all the years I spent raising him, nurturing him, and putting his needs first had amounted to nothing. I tried to reason with him, but every conversation felt like walking on broken glass. I wasn't angry with him, but there was a bitterness that lingered in my heart. I had always done what I thought was right for my family, but now it felt like I was being judged, like I was being told that my desires and needs didn't matter anymore. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what Ryan didn't understand was that I wasn't trying to replace Sarah. I wasn't trying to forget her. I was simply trying to live, something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. One evening, I sat down in the living room staring out the window. The sun was setting and the sky was a mixture of pinks and oranges, casting a peaceful glow over the house. But inside I felt anything but peaceful. Ryan had stormed out of the house earlier that day, his face filled with anger, and I hadn't heard from him since. I had tried to call, tried to reach out, but he wouldn't pick up. It was then that I realized how deeply hurt I was. I felt rejected, abandoned, not by Helen, not by the possibility of love, but by the person I had raised to understand me better than anyone. It was an odd feeling, one that I didn't know how to navigate. The love I had for my children, the sacrifices I made for them, it all seemed to be overshadowed by Ryan's refusal to accept me as a whole person. He saw me only through the lens of being his father, the man who had always been there for him, the one who was supposed to be wise, experienced, and above the emotional turmoil that a relationship could bring. But what Ryan didn't understand was that I wasn't just a father. I was a man, one who had loved deeply, who had lived, and who was still capable of feeling joy and pain. But the idea of letting go of my own happiness to make him feel comfortable was not something I was willing to accept. The more I tried to understand Ryan's perspective, the more I realized that his anger was rooted in fear. Fear of losing me. For years I had been his rock, his guiding figure, and the thought of me moving on without his approval was something he couldn't handle. But what Ryan didn't see was that I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't leaving him behind. I was simply trying to find a piece of life that I had lost, something that would bring me back to myself. But as his anger simmered, it began to take a toll on me. The emotional weight of his judgment started to drain my energy, and I began to question myself. Was I wrong? Was I really too old for love? Was my pursuit of happiness selfish? I didn't want to admit it, but the constant tension between us was beginning to chip away at the bond we shared. I felt myself retreating, afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing something that would make things worse. I was lost between wanting to hold on to the relationship I had with Ryan and not wanting to give up on the chance of finding happiness again. I had spent so many years focused on my family that I had forgotten to focus on myself. I didn't want to make the same mistake again. But the price I was paying for this pursuit was higher than I expected. Every time I spoke to Ryan, it felt like I was losing a piece of him. I remember the night he came over for dinner. It had been days since our last argument, and I thought maybe we could start over, find some common ground. But when he walked in, I could see it in his eyes. The same anger, the same reluctance to accept what I had chosen for myself. The dinner was awkward, to say the least. Every word felt like it carried the weight of our unresolved conflict, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both playing a part in a drama we didn't know how to end. Ryan was distant, polite even, but his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was still angry, still unwilling to accept that I was entitled to my own happiness. It was at that moment that I realized the true depth of the divide between us. It wasn't just about a relationship or love. It was about my right to live fully, to experience life beyond the role of a father, a provider, a caregiver. And that realization stung more than I expected. How could I move forward with my life when the one person I thought would support me in this journey was the one holding me back? My heart ached. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself doubting everything I had chosen to do. Was it worth it? Would I lose my son forever if I pursued this happiness? Would I sacrifice my family for the chance at something new? I didn't have answers, only the overwhelming sense that I was at a crossroads. The silence between Ryan and me stretched on for weeks. Each time I saw him, it felt like a reminder of what I had lost. Not just the easy camaraderie we once shared, but the way he had once seen me, the man I was before all of this began. In his eyes, I wasn't the strong father he once looked up to anymore. Instead, I was someone who had betrayed his expectations, someone who was too old for the kind of love he thought was reserved for the young and the hopeful. But I wasn't a young man anymore, and I wasn't foolish enough to believe that time could turn back. All I could do was accept the fact that this was where I was now, and that meant choosing myself. Still, the emotional toll of Ryan's rejection weighed heavily on me. I kept trying to make sense of it, but there was no easy explanation for why he couldn't accept my choices. It wasn't just about Helen. It was about the way Ryan viewed me now. He seemed to think that my desire for love was a betrayal of his mother, a sign of weakness or indecision, when in reality, it was my way of reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried for so long. It wasn't about Sarah. I would never forget her, never replace her, but it was about moving forward. And for Ryan, that was something he couldn't accept. I had always been there for him, but now it felt like he couldn't be there for me. I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us, how to make him understand that the love I was seeking didn't diminish his place in my heart. It was a struggle I wasn't prepared for, one that tested my patience, my resilience, and my desire to find peace. Each day that passed without reconciliation made me question my decision, my right to seek happiness. The pain of seeing Ryan struggle with this was far worse than the isolation I had once known. But I had already made up my mind. Love was still possible for me, and I would fight for it, even if it meant losing something along the way. The hardest part wasn't the anger Ryan felt toward me. It wasn't even the rejection I felt from him. It was the slow erosion of the relationship we once had, the distance growing between us with every conversation we avoided, every moment we chose to stay apart rather than face the truth. I had always believed that family was everything, that blood ran deeper than anything else, but now I wondered how much we could stand to lose before it was too late. How long could we keep pretending everything was fine when the truth was staring us both in the face? And yet, as much as I felt like I was losing Ryan, I knew I couldn't stop. I had spent my entire life building my identity around others, around my role as a father, as a husband. But now I needed to reclaim myself, and that meant choosing the life I wanted for myself, even if it meant standing up to my son, even if it meant facing the possibility that the relationship I cherished might never be the same again. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and I was on the edge of something that could either bring healing or deepen the rift between us forever. The emotional toll was heavy, but it was a price I was willing to pay. After all, wasn't It worth fighting for my own happiness, even if it meant losing a piece of my past? I'd spent months wrestling with myself, torn between my need for love and the fear of losing my son. The distance between Ryan and me had grown so wide that it felt like there was an unspoken wall between us, one I couldn't seem to break through no matter how hard I tried. The conversations we had were strained, polite but distant, and every time I brought up Helen, his face would harden, and I could see the anger in his eyes. It wasn't just disappointment I saw, it was something deeper, something more hurtful. It was as though he couldn't accept that his father, the person who had always been the rock of the family, could want something more, could want love again, and each time I tried to explain, it only seemed to push him further away. The truth weighed heavily on me. I had always prided myself on being a good father, someone who put his family first, who sacrificed for the ones he loved. But now I was questioning everything. Was I being selfish? Was my desire to move forward with my life, to find companionship, so wrong? I had never imagined I would be in this position, standing on the edge of a decision that could tear apart the very fabric of my family. My love for Helen was real. I wasn't just seeking her out of loneliness. I was seeking a connection, something that made me feel whole again. But how could I reconcile that with Ryan's clear disapproval? The idea of losing him, of having him turn his back on me, gnawed at me constantly. One afternoon, after weeks of silence, I received a call from Ryan. I hadn't heard from him in days, and when I saw his name on my phone screen, I felt a knot of anxiety form in my chest. Was he finally ready to talk? Or was this another confrontation waiting to happen? I hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Dad, we need to talk," Ryan said, his voice surprisingly calm. The relief that flooded me was immediate, but it was quickly followed by a wave of uncertainty. I didn't know what kind of conversation this would be, whether it would be another argument or if we would finally find some middle ground. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "What's on your mind?" I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said, and there was a pause as if he were choosing his words carefully. "I didn't handle things well. I'm sorry." I felt a lump in my throat. Hearing those words from Ryan, after everything we'd been through, was more than I could have hoped for. I had been prepared for anger, for more resistance, but instead it felt like the first crack in the wall between us. But even as the relief washed over me, there was a lingering doubt. What did he really mean by this apology? Was he just trying to smooth things over, or was he truly ready to understand? "I appreciate that, Ryan," I said, my voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But I don't want to just hear the words. I need to know that you really understand why I'm doing this, why I want this." There was another pause on the line. I could hear him taking a deep breath, like he was gathering his thoughts. "I get it," he finally said, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. "I get that you're not trying to replace Mom. I think I was just scared. Scared of losing you, I guess." His words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, Ryan wasn't just angry. He was vulnerable. And in that moment, I realized that everything he had said, all the anger and frustration, had come from a place of fear. He hadn't been rejecting me. He had been afraid of the changes that would come if I let someone else into my life. I had spent so much time focusing on my own desires that I hadn't truly seen what my son was going through. His world, as he knew it, was shifting. The foundation he had relied on, me, his father, was being shaken by something he didn't understand. And in that moment, the truth became clear to me. This wasn't just about me finding love again. This was about Ryan coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to be the person I once was. I wasn't just his father anymore. I was a man who had his own needs, his own desires, his own future to consider. And that was something he had to accept. After our conversation, I knew that I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep waiting for the right moment for Ryan to give me permission to live my life. I wasn't just living for him anymore. I was living for myself. And I wasn't about to let his fears or insecurities prevent me from embracing the future. I made up my mind that I was going to take action, Action that would not only show Ryan that I was serious about my happiness, but also give him the chance to see the love I had found in a new light. A week later, I invited Ryan and his family to a gathering at my house. I had already planned a small dinner with Helen, and I knew that this would be the moment when I could no longer hide behind excuses. It was time for Ryan to meet her. I had hoped that this would be the turning point, the moment when he would finally see that this wasn't a betrayal, but a chance for me to live a fuller life. I wasn't asking for his approval. I was asking for his understanding. But I also knew that it might not be as simple as that. Ryan had been so hurt, so resistant, and it wasn't going to change overnight. But this was my chance. The night of the dinner arrived, and I could feel the nervousness bubbling inside me. I had planned everything carefully. The table was set, the food was ready, and Helen was there looking as beautiful as ever. But as soon as Ryan and his family arrived, I saw the tension in his face. His eyes flicked nervously from me to Helen, and I could feel the weight of the moment settle over us. I tried to be calm, to make light conversation, but I could see how uncomfortable Ryan was. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The silence was loud enough. As the evening wore on, I could tell that Ryan was starting to soften, just a little. He was no longer glaring at Helen or avoiding eye contact with me. He was listening, paying attention. At one point, I caught his gaze across the table, and I saw something I hadn't seen in weeks. A hint of curiosity, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. When dinner was over, I excused myself for a moment and pulled Ryan aside. "I hope you're starting to see, son," I said quietly, "that love doesn't have an age limit. It doesn't matter how old I am. What matters is that I'm still here, still alive, and still capable of feeling everything I once did. I'm not trying to replace your mother. I'll never forget her, but I deserve to live too." For the first time in what felt like forever, Ryan didn't interrupt me. He just stood there silent, watching me. And then, slowly, a soft sigh escaped him. "I get it, Dad. I really do. And I'm sorry. I've been selfish. I just didn't know how to handle it." His words, though simple, carried more weight than I could have imagined. I didn't expect an immediate change, but this was the first step toward healing, toward reconciliation. I had done it. I had taken the leap, introduced the person I loved to my son, and shown him that love didn't have an expiration date. The moment was more than I could have hoped for. What Ryan saw in that room wasn't just a new relationship. It was a new chapter of life, one that was still unfolding for both of us. And that moment, his quiet acknowledgement, left me speechless. The night was drawing to a close, and the tension in the air was palpable. I had invited Ryan over for dinner, hoping that the gathering would serve as the turning point for both of us. I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would be solved in a single night, but the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would finally understand was all I had left. Helen was sitting beside me, calm and poised, her presence as steady as ever. She had been a true source of comfort for me in the last few months, someone who truly saw me, not just as an older man, but as someone who still had the capacity for love, for companionship, for living. But as the evening wore on, I began to notice Ryan's behavior. He hadn't said much, his eyes darting nervously between Helen and me, clearly uncomfortable in her presence. I understood. This wasn't an easy situation for him to swallow. He had lived his entire life with the image of his father as someone who didn't need anyone else, a man who had built his life on self-sufficiency and unwavering devotion to his family. Now, here I was, trying to tell him that I needed something more, that I had needs that went beyond being a father, beyond the roles I had been playing for so long. And that, for him, was a hard pill to swallow. He wasn't angry anymore, but he was distant, almost as if he were in a battle between what he thought I should be and what I was now. Helen and I shared a quiet conversation, but I couldn't help but notice that Ryan wasn't engaging. He wasn't making eye contact, and his posture was stiff, as though he was trying to maintain some invisible barrier between us. The silence between us was deafening. At one point, Helen smiled and tried to include him, offering him a plate of food, but he just nodded curtly, barely touching his plate. It wasn't the reception I had hoped for, but I had expected it to some degree. After all, this was a big change for him. His world had just been turned upside down, and I knew it would take time for him to accept it. Then, as the evening wore on, I noticed something different in Ryan. His eyes had softened just a little. He wasn't as rigid, and when he spoke to Helen, his tone was less cold, though still guarded. I could see him beginning to observe her, listen to her laugh, to watch the way she moved and spoke. And for the first time that evening, he didn't look like he was bracing for an attack. I didn't know if it was because he had finally accepted the situation or if it was because he saw something in Helen that made him rethink his stance. Either way, I could feel a shift, a subtle change in the air. When dinner had finished, I asked Ryan if we could talk for a moment away from the others. My heart pounded in my chest as we walked outside, the cool night air brushing against my face. It was now or never. If I didn't take this moment to reach him, if I didn't make him understand, I feared that the gap between us would only widen. We stood on the porch, facing each other. The silence stretched between us for a moment, but I refused to back down now. I know this isn't easy for you, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I didn't expect it to be, but I need you to understand that this— I gestured back toward the house where Helen and the others were. This is me still living. I'm not just your father, I'm a person and I'm allowed to want more even at my age. Ryan shifted his weight, his gaze falling to the ground. I could feel the weight of his struggle. He didn't want to hurt me, but he didn't know how to navigate this new reality. After a moment, he looked up, his face softening. I know, Dad. I know, he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I guess I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of everything changing. His words hit me like a wave. All this time I had thought it was about me, about my needs, but it wasn't. It had always been about him. His fear of losing the father he had known, of having to face the world without me in the way he was used to. I had never truly considered how difficult this would be for him. It was a revelation that shook me to my core, and in that moment I realized how much he needed me, not just as his father, but as someone who could guide him through this new stage of life. I'm not going anywhere, Ryan, I said softly, my voice breaking. I'll always be here, but I'm still alive. I'm still capable of loving, of feeling. I'm not a ghost. I don't want you to lose me, but I need to live. I need to feel alive. Ryan was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching mine. I could see the battle in his expression, the internal struggle. But then, slowly, he nodded. I get it, Dad. I really do. His voice was thick, like he was holding back something more. I don't want to stand in the way of you being happy. I didn't know how to handle it. I'm sorry. Those words, though simple, were everything. It wasn't just an apology. It was the acknowledgement of something that had been unspoken between us for so long. He was finally accepting the reality of the situation, finally seeing me not as an old man, but as someone who had the right to live, to love, and to experience joy. I felt a rush of emotion that I hadn't expected. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. But it wasn't until I saw Ryan's eyes soften completely, until I watched him look back toward the house where Helen was standing with a gentle smile on her face, that I knew something had truly shifted. He wasn't just accepting this because he had to. He was accepting it because he understood. And in that understanding, I realized that I wasn't just some old man trying to cling to the past. I was still alive, still capable of love, and I had a future to look forward to. And so did Ryan. The following days were filled with small, quiet moments that spoke volumes. Ryan's demeanor had softened, and though there was still some discomfort between us, I could see the shift. He didn't just tolerate my relationship with Helen. He was slowly beginning to accept it, and in doing so, he was accepting me. Not just as his father, but as a person with desires, with a life that didn't stop because of his expectations. It wasn't going to be an easy road, but I could feel that the worst was behind us. The climax of the story, the moment I had feared the most, had passed. The emotional stakes had been at their highest, and I had feared that if I took the wrong step, I could lose my son forever. But instead, by showing Ryan who I really was, not just the father he knew, but the man I had always been, the man who still had dreams, still had love to give, I had opened a door for him, and he had stepped through it. But it wasn't just about Ryan's acceptance, it was about me too. I had taken action, made the decision to move forward, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my own life. I had stopped hiding behind the roles I had played for so long and had started living for myself, again. And in that decision, I found freedom. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. I was thriving. As I sat on the porch that night, looking out at the stars, I realized something profound. The battle hadn't been just with Ryan or with society or with my age. The real struggle had been with myself. The fear that I was too old for love, that I was too late to find happiness. It had all been a lie I had told myself for too long. Now I could finally see clearly. I was still here. I was still capable of love, and that was all that mattered. The next time I saw Ryan, his smile was warmer, his handshake firmer. There was no longer an unspoken tension between us. We were moving forward together, and that was more than I could have ever asked for. What I had feared would tear us apart had, in fact, brought us closer. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. And I knew, without a doubt, that love, in whatever form it took, had no expiration date. Have you ever felt like you were being judged by your loved ones for pursuing your happiness or chasing your dreams? It's tough when the people closest to you don't understand your journey or your desire to live fully. But here's the thing. Life is too short to let anyone tell you what you're too old, too young, or too anything to do. We all deserve to find joy, to love, and to live authentically, no matter where we are in life. So have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for your happiness even when those around you didn't understand? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you navigated that challenge and how you overcame it. If this story resonated with you and you want to hear more heartwarming stories about love, family, and the power of perseverance, hit the like button and subscribe. We've got so much more to share. Don't let anyone limit your happiness or define what you're capable of. Keep striving for what you deserve and remember that it's never too late to live life on your own terms. Life is about growth, change, and embracing new opportunities, no matter your age. So let's keep this conversation going together. We can inspire each other to keep pushing forward, embracing love, and living fully.